Hello and welcome to the Heat Check podcast, the Miami Herald's Miami Heat podcast, a late night edition once again of the Heat Check podcast. I'm David Wilson. I'm joined, as always, on the other line by Anthony Chiang, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. Just got home from a long day at FTX Arena, opening night for the Heat. Miami loses 116-108 to the Bulls. Weird performance. It's opening night, so you never want to read too much into it. But a couple, I don't know. Obviously, a couple of key guys did not play particularly well tonight. We'll talk about. I don't know what the level of concern is with some of these guys versus. I'm sure some of this is just one night of the season. The Heat turned it over. I mean, you kind of sum it up with I think two big numbers, right? And that is the Heat turning it over 19 times and Bam scoring 12 points on 5 of 15 shooting. Those are two. What you would assume will be outlier performances for this team. Obviously not gonna average 19 turnovers per game, and Bam is going to be much better than that on a night-to-night basis. But on opening night of the season, it was kind of enough to doom them with just those two numbers, I think, basically.
Yeah, I would say the turnovers were huge. I mean, I think they had 13 of their 19 turnovers in the second half. And then you pair that with their defensive issues, especially in the third quarter. They allowed 37 points, I think, on like 60-something% shooting. That's basically when the Bulls pulled away, right? I mean, that's when they built their lead and gained some separation. That was the game right there. Their defense in the second half, really from like late in the second quarter through the third quarter, was awful. It was terrifying. Some of that was DeRozan just doing what DeRozan does. He got into a groove and he was hitting those mid-rangers that just tough to stop. Yeah. But the defense also let some easy ones.
They were in control for into the second quarter, and then it just kind of got away from them.
Yeah, they were ahead by 9 in the first half. The starting lineup looked good early on in their first shift, but that was really their only positive shift throughout the entire game, which I'm sure we'll get to, David, with that starting group. But really, I would say, you talk to guys after the game, you talk to Spoelstra after the game. Defense, turnovers, that's what they say was the biggest. Those are the biggest issues tonight. But I will say, looking at the numbers now that I have some time to kind of go over things, their defensive rating wasn't good, and it was basically league average if we compare it to last season's league rankings. The third quarter obviously was really bad, but overall in the game, their defense was pretty much average. Their offense was, one game offensive rating, but if you compare it to numbers from last season, they would have been the worst in the NBA just from tonight. So their offense was, arguably worse than their defense tonight. But after the game, the talking point was defense.
Yeah, well, it's always going to be defense, right?
Yeah,
that's just the way Spo rolls. It's always defense. They shot. We talked about this last week. That really high win percentage they had last year when they shot over 40% from three. Now they're 0-1 when they shoot over 40% from three.
They lost 2 games all of last season.
All last year, right? What was it, like 32-2 or something like that? I think you tweeted it out.
They're 30. They were something like that. 32-2, I believe. But 32-2 when they shot 40% or better. 32-34 when they shot worse than 40%. They're now 0-1 when they shoot over 40% this season. So if you need any reminder that this is a new year, let that be your reminder.
There you go. Yeah. Some positive signs. I would definitely say, right, Tyler Herro was, especially in the first quarter, really looked like a guy who's going to be worth the money they're paying him. Jimmy Butler was really good. Caleb, as you mentioned, that first run with the starters, I thought that was what obviously they were hoping it was going to look like, that first run with the starters. He fit in perfectly. But ultimately just again, it's weird that they shot 40% and lost, and that does not fit with the Heat we saw from last year. But in a lot of ways, the way they lost tonight was the Heat. They have a way that they look when they lose, and it kind of looked like that tonight, right? A lot of turnovers in a lot of their losses last year. They got really loose with the ball. The lack of a just go-to shot maker, right? When you can get a stop, and then the key to coming back in basketball games is turning stops into scores. And I think in the fourth quarter, they they turned on the defense a little bit, got a lot of stops early, and just could not really get that deficit down. I think the closest it got maybe was 5. Like they never really
around there 4 or 5. Yeah,
they never could quite get it, and that's the lack of having that traditional type of shot maker. And then, just not great Bam, right? Those are 3 of the things I think if you look at like a lot of the Heat losses from last year, it would be a pretty common thread. So, they're going to have, assuming they look something similar to they did last year, like they're going to have games that look like this a couple times this year. They're going to have nights when you see that and you're like, ooh, this doesn't look very good. But obviously they do enough other stuff well that make it so that these are just going to be ideally outlier performances right now. Obviously, it's the only game we have to work off of. So hard to know exactly what it's going to look like, but I guess it's going to look better than that on a nightly basis.
Yeah. I love discussing one game sample.
I know
it's the best. But really, you're right. It's the only thing we have to work off of. But
it is
just you look at the box score, right? And the Heat won a lot of the categories. They shot a better from the field. They made 1 fewer 3 than the Bulls. They outscored them by 1 point at the free throw line. It really, again, the empty possessions late in the game. That's really what did the Heat in. They took 13 fewer shots in Chicago, and that's hard to win when you take that many fewer shots than your opponent. So simple math is you probably if the other team has more opportunities to score, they have a better shot at winning. So I think it really comes down to that. But I think the Heat, it's a similar team. We've spoken about it. 13 returning guys. But they're trying to play differently. And I think you saw a little bit of that tonight. Just the rotation. I know Victor Oladipo's out, so that kind of changes things. But the rotation, just in general, you see it kind of more tilted toward offense, right? And that's not something we've seen a lot from this team. Like it's mostly been defense. Last year, they were top 5 defense. Offensively, they did enough to win games, obviously. They were the number 1 seed. But that wasn't the strength. They were built around defense. This year, you see the lineups they're putting out there, a lot of Max Strus Duncan minutes, Max Strus Duncan Tyler minutes.
The 40% threshold we put, like they're going to hit that more this year just because they're going to have more. If this is the rotation, and it probably won't be because that's how Spo rolls, but if this is the rotation, they just got more shooters in the lineup.
Yeah, and we kind of saw that shift late last regular season when Duncan followed the starting lineup, and then Duncan was coming off the bench, and they were trying to open things up for Jimmy and Bam by playing more shooters around them. So it's just kind of a continuation of that, but it's just different. And I asked Max Strus, like, does it feel like, even though some of the same faces, like, does this feel like you guys are playing a different style? And he's like, yeah, kind of. We're trying to play faster, which makes sense, right? Because the Heat's half-court offense wasn't great last year. That was one of their weaknesses. And this year, I mean, obviously tonight in the opener wasn't good. And also said just new combinations. Like even though we're the same guys, like new combinations, new lineups with this, a different starting lineup. Like it takes a while to get used to. So I think you saw some of the growing pains tonight. Not that that's an excuse to lose to a team without 2 of its best players, and Zach LaVine and Alonzo Ball at home. But I think some of those tweaks that the Heat made in the offseason, and they're trying to play differently. Like there's gonna be some game moments like this where it just doesn't look smooth.
Yeah, Bulls seem shorthand. Like that's one that if this was not opening night, I think we would be maybe a little harsher on them. Losing without Zach LaVine in the lineup, getting absolutely torched by DeMar DeRozan. The defense, as you said, just like honestly not as bad as the offense, but they have a higher standard on defense. Like they're a team that's used to kind of locking down stars and especially when there's kind of one star carrying the load, right? It's not very often that an Eric Spoelstra team gets like single-handedly beaten by one guy, right? It usually has to be a collective effort, and that kind of happened tonight. Just to look a little like out of sorts on defense, and I guess this can pivot us to talking about Bam a little bit because obviously it was not his best performance. I would say on either side, Vucevic got the best of him a little bit there. He's so central to what they do defensively. But then also on offense, he was aggressive early, right? It was the big talking point all off season was, is he going to get his shots up, and he shot a lot early. Took him a while to find to make one.
Make one, yeah.
Yeah, but what did you? So to me, it's. I mean, again, like Bam is gonna have these games every once in a while, just because he's not an incredible offensive player. But what did you make of his performance tonight? And I don't know, do you have any concerns based off this one game sample size?
I'm not too concerned because the looks he was getting, like he missed like a dunk, he missed like 2 layups. Like it's like
he's got to dunk more though.
Yeah, he doesn't dunk. You're right. He doesn't really dunk enough for the shots he gets and his size and yeah, he should naturally just get more dunks. But I think Eric Spoelstra called it after the game an anomaly, and that's what it kind of felt like. I'm not totally writing it off because there were obviously some things he could have done better, but there were so many easy looks that he normally makes that if he makes just 3 of them, like it looks a lot better at 8 of 15, right? He started 1 of 10 from the field. So he shot 4 or 5 in the second half. It was better in the second half. You want to see him be more aggressive than taking 5 shots in the second half.
And then you're up 15, right? If he starts 4 of 10, you're up 15 early, and it changes everything.
Yeah. So yeah, it was an off game for him, but I'm not overly concerned because I think they were good looks, and over a larger sample, like he'll be okay.
Does just the fact that he took as many shots as he did, especially early on, is that
a positive? That's a good sign. Yeah, it's a good sign.
Would you like him? I don't know. At the same time, is there like you don't want him to press, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, right? Like you want him to take more shots, right? Obviously, that's the push. That's been the storyline. That's been the narrative this offseason. But you want him to take shots in the flow of the offense. You don't want him to press or force things, like you said. But it felt like his looks were okay. Like I don't think they were like he was forcing things. Like again, they were good looks. He just missed them.
Right.
So if anything, I think the bigger issue with his game tonight was the 5 turnovers. He committed the most turnovers on the team. And yes, he has the ball in his hands a lot because he's above the offense, but he can't be committing 5 turnovers. So that was probably the biggest issue with his performance.
Yeah, it's gonna be a balance, right? It's gonna be the balance, and it's always is the balance of being aggressive and letting things happen in the flow of the offense. And it was another topic we touched on last week. Like a lot of the assists he used to get are the dribble handoff stuff. Yeah. And just the way the lineups are structured this year, that's not going to be, I don't think, as central to what this team does. So, he's going to have a different role in this offense than he has had in the past. And that's another place where again, he's established, he's a star. He's one of the best 2-way guys in the league, but there's going to be growing pains for a guy like him too. And that's just what happens for every team in the NBA, right? And the first game of the season can sometimes be determined by a guy like DeMar DeRozan going off for 37 when when no one else is kind of playing up to their standard.
Yeah, and to your point, that's a really good point, David. Like Bam now, it just seems like it because of the personnel he's playing around now with Tyler Herro in the starting lineup. A lot more pick and rolls he's involved. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more rolling to the basket as opposed to the dribble handoff stuff. So yeah, that's an adjustment for him. And we've talked about like they're gonna try to play different. They're gonna try new ideas, and there's gonna be rough patches. And again, it's not an excuse, but you saw some of that tonight. Whether it was Bam, playing the way he did, or Kyle Lowry, which we probably need to get into, just not being aggressive enough, not being as big of, he needs to be a little more aggressive offensively, I think, and be more involved on that end of the court for this team to really reach its ceiling. And just a starting lineup in general, it was a good start, but other than that, they just weren't good. I think they're outscored by 13 points in their 17 minutes together in the opener. When your starting lineup is getting outscored by 13 points, you're not going to win many games. So that unit needs to play better. They simply just need more time together. We spoke about last week. They didn't play much of their last year. And then in the preseason, they played 1 game together.
Right.
So you would think naturally it would get better as time goes on, but tonight was not a good start to the year for them.
What did you like from the starting lineup? Obviously, they had a very good run at the start of the game, as you mentioned. Did not sustain it after that. What did you like about what you saw at the start of the game from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw what Tyler and Caleb add, right? Tyler with his spot up shooting, his ability to make not only just to make threes, but he's a more diverse offensive player than a Max Strus or a Duncan Robinson, right? He can put the ball on the floor, he could create, he's effective in pick and rolls. Like he has a more diverse skill set. And then Caleb Martin, he basically all of his production came in that first quarter during those first few minutes when the starting line played well. He scored all 7 of his points,
right off
3 assists. Yeah. But you saw him again.
PJ Tucker.
Yeah, I mean he looked, you kind of saw what makes him different than PJ Tucker at that 4 spot. Guys, attacking closeouts, putting the ball on the floor, creating open shots for other guys. PJ Tucker didn't do that last year. He was either in the corner hitting spot up 3 or taking spot up 3s, or on the elbow, playing a dribble handle.
He was a true facilitator, like a pivot.
Yeah,
he was like a pivot.
Yeah, so it's just you kind of saw what the starting lineup could be, I think, in that first quarter. But then after that, late in the second quarter, they came out again, and the Bulls made a run to tie it entering halftime. And then obviously in the beginning of the third quarter, the starting lineup was not good at all, and that's kind of when the Bulls made their run and gained some separation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like we said, the Heat was within striking distance at the end of the game, down 4 or 5 points. The starters, for the most part, checked back in. Strus stayed in, but they had a chance to go win that game, and obviously couldn't get it done at the end. Herro, I guess we should talk about a little bit. Awesome run at the start of the game, especially hitting threes, hitting crazy reverse layup. Getting to the free throw line a couple times. Better in the second half, but that first run, that's who he is. He's going to give you a quarter at a time or an 8-minute burst at a time where he's going to just single-handedly take over the game. Obviously, the next step for him is get to the level where he can do that across 36 minutes a night. But no, I thought a very promising start to his season. If he looks like that all year, then he's going to be deserving of that spot in the starting lineup.
Yeah, offensively, I still, even though Jimmy's great, and when you need someone to score in crunch time in a huge game, you're going to put the ball in Jimmy's hands most of the time. But Tyler is probably still the most fluid, natural scorer on the team. And his offensive package just keeps growing. I mean, that reverse layup in that first quarter was incredible. What a finish. So, not only is he hitting threes, obviously, it looks like he's shooting better from the outside. He obviously has that mid-range game, but his package around the basket continues to get a lot better than it was a few years ago. So, yeah, my biggest thing that I'm watching is, like, can they maximize him in that starting unit? And I know he's going to play a lineup set where he can be that guy. But even just like his usage rate from tonight, like, it wasn't as high as it was. I think it was 22% tonight, and last year it was a little higher. So, like, we knew his usage rate was going to go down, but how much of a dip is there going to be, and is that a good thing for him? Like, do you want that usage rate to not be as high as it was last year? So that's kind of the one thing I'm monitoring. Like, are they maximizing Tyler's skill set by using him in that lineup? And they might not have a choice, right? He wants to be a starter. Yeah. He's good enough to be a starter. It's just a fit in that lineup. I don't know. We'll see if it really can work, and if it's really utilizing him in the best way possible.
Yeah. Yeah, they need that starting lineup to be good, right? When you move the 6th man of the year into the starting lineup, you're theoretically sacrificing some bench production for the benefit of improving your starting lineup, which means they have to be good. And tonight, like you said, they were not good.
Yeah. I mean, that's bottom line. So I think not to transition a little bit to Kyle Lowry. To me, it's one game, but that's probably the most concerning thing from tonight, I would say, just because we saw a lot of this last season as well with Kyle, where like he just wasn't involved enough offensively. And then, to start the season, for him to start 1 of 7, I think he took 2 shots in the first half. Like, I know he's playing around a lot of guys who, you want Jimmy to take shots, you want Bam to take more shots, you obviously want the ball in Tyler's hands. So Kyle is not going to take 18 shots a game. But taking 2 shots in the first half, or I think it was, I'm trying to see. 2 shots, 0 of 2 in the first half, like that can't happen, right? Like, he should be one of your best offensive players. He should be, directing things. Like, he finished with 4 assists and 3 turnovers. Like, it's just when he's playing 35 minutes, he just needs to be more involved. So I think that is something that he need to find an answer for to get him more involved in those lineups, because he's a big part of making that star lineup work. And if he can't, they can't maximize his skill set or utilize his skill set in the best in that combination, is there an argument to be made? I know I don't want to overreact to one game, but is there an argument to be made of him playing off the bench as kind of the running the second unit? I don't know, but Kyle just has to do more than what he did tonight.
Yeah, let's wrap up with the Kyle Lowry. I think that's where we need to finish this. It's kind of the elephant in the room, and dating back really to the end of last year, right? Because the start of the last season was so positive for him. He looked like he looked like the all-star they hoped they were getting, and just eventually, he obviously missed a lot of time. Came back and did not look like a guy at all during the playoffs. And I think what we saw tonight unfortunately, looked a lot like the bad Kyle Lowry we saw in the second half of last year. The jumper was all over the place, 0 for 5 from 3. That was when they first brought him in last year. That was a huge part, I think, of what we thought he was going to bring to this team, was giving them a legitimately great 3-point shooter at point guard. And whether it's whether it was injuries last year or just age or whatever it was, by the end of last year, he was, kind of across the board a liability. And we saw the kind of worst of him, I think, tonight. It's only game 1. Sure. He's an older guy. Sometimes older guys need to play their way into shape a little bit as the season goes on. But what we saw tonight was, I would say, concerning, just because it looked similar to what we saw at the end of last year. Yeah. It's not, it fits with the trend that we saw last year, the downward trend we saw. And at 36, when you're that old, it takes, it's a lot harder to get back on track when you're in your mid to late 30s than it is when you're hit a slump when you're 26.
Yeah, and I think, again, we know for this Heat team to reach its ceiling, like, Kyle needs to be the guy he was in the final weeks of last season, where he's, hitting that pull-up 3 or long mid-range jumper, off those pick and roll sets, and kind of attacking drop defenses and being more aggressive and being a guy you could rely on late in games. And, he led the league, and he was second in the NBA in charges drawn last year. I mean, those are all things
that he had. Even when he was not great in the playoffs, he had that.
He did. But offensively, like, again, he just, it's one game, but I think what makes it concerning is, again, we saw a lot of it this last year, where he just,
they're the same problems he had.
Same problems, and he wasn't taking many shots. He was, not really looking for his own as far as scoring for most of the year. There were nights where, again, he was, 1 of 7. Like, we saw some of those nights last year. So he'll have better games in this. Obviously, he's not going to shoot 1 of 7 for the rest of the season. But, you were hoping that you would see a little bit of a different Kyle to start this season. And, this wasn't the start I'm sure he wanted, and the Heat didn't want, obviously. So, yeah, I think if I had to pick one thing that's most concerning, it's Kyle Lowry's performance, just because that's been the biggest question mark for the past few months in the offseason, and he didn't exactly have the best answer to start off this season.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously we talked a couple, I don't know, a month, whatever media day where he was kind of as defiant as we've ever heard someone be about like Pat Riley, and like the fitness comments and all that, and again we've said it, he's got a different body type. He's never going to be, I think he's never going to look the way that I think a lot of Heat fans would like him to look. But, you know, and he never has, and he's made it work a lot. But it all just kind of, it all adds to the, I think,
the
scrutiny that he's going to have, right? Yeah, the narrative, the scrutiny, you know, the fact he's the third high, you know, one of the three highest paid players on the team. He's getting paid like he's supposed to be this team's third star. It's hard to win if one of your guys being paid like that is not performing to that standard. And the Heat, for the most part, made it work last year. Again, he was, I think people forget, he was really good at the first half of the season.
He was good
injuries and some personal stuff.
Yeah.
Before some injuries and some personal issues kept him off the court for a lot of the second half of the year, and then obviously injuries in the playoffs. You know, he's obviously not the Kyle Lowry of 5 years ago, when he was the guy in Toronto. But if he's the guy that he was in the first half of last year, then I think this is fine. If he's the guy that he was in the playoffs, they got to get lucky in some ways, right? You got to have guys that are, and the Heat are fortunate. They've got a lot of guys, I think, on favorable contracts, right? Like if Max Strus has another great year and takes another step, that's a big deal. Caleb Martin obviously could do that. Victor Oladipo. Like there's a lot of, you know, we didn't see Victor Oladipo tonight. We didn't see Nikola Jovic. Like a couple of guys who are going to be important parts of this thing and can help you overcome some deficiencies elsewhere on the roster. But like Victor Oladipo Kyle Lowry, he has to be better than he was tonight.
Yeah.
Again, and it's one game. We think he can be better than he was tonight, but you know, we saw the margin for error shrinks a lot if he's not, you know, if at some point he's going to fall off as a player, right? It happens, and if that happens this year, the margin for error for the Heat becomes a lot thinner.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair to say. Like if Kyle Lowry plays like this or anything close to this season, like they're not going to be a championship.
Right. It's not even like this. He's got to be a lot better than this. It's not like he was like just kind of bad. He was awful tonight.
Yeah, and it's not like he has to be a superstar, right? If he plays like he did last regular season, like they're a contender.
Yeah, well, like he was like top 10 in the NBA in assists, shoot 37% from three, like
44% from the field on 10 shots a game, you know. But the 1 of 7, again, taking 2 shots in the first half, you don't want to see that, right? Like he just needs to be more involved in what they're doing, and I think that's part again of growing pains with this starting lineup. Like there is so many guys who not only can need to take shots, but can have the ball in their hands and direct things. Like Tyler Herro, he could play as a point guard. We've seen Bam, we've seen him facilitate. Jimmy, obviously, even Caleb Martin is a guy who can put the ball on the floor and facilitate. Like where does that leave Kyle Lowry? How does he fit in this group? And I think that's a big question that still needs to be answered because it didn't look like the best fit tonight, at least. And, you know, we'll see moving forward if it gets better.
All right. I think we can wrap things up there. You got any final thoughts before we get going and go to bed?
It's one game. Let's not overreact. Although
Celtics,
I will say,
it's going to be fun. We should say that Celtics is going to be a good test on Friday.
I will say the Heat don't have an easy schedule. Like this could get, I mean, if they need to play a lot better or it could get ugly really quick. I mean, Boston's obviously very, very good. Toronto, talented, you know, a team that most people think will make the playoffs. And then they go out west for 3 games, which is never easy.
Yeah.
So this was a winnable game that they didn't take advantage of. But again, it's one game. There's 81 to go. So stay calm.
All right. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chiang. He's got all your coverage from Heat opening night, and obviously all season long. Be sure to follow him. You can follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. I'm all over the place like usual, but on this Heat Check podcast in your podcast apps every Thursday morning. So be sure to subscribe and listen all year long because we'll be here every week from now until the Heat season ends. Maybe the NBA Finals. They're gonna have to be better than they were tonight, though, if they want to make it there. But anyway, thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.